Today, my presentation is, I get really hyped when I speak, so you're probably not seeing me jump around, but this presentation is around Martin Luther King's speech called "What is Your Life's Blueprint?" So for our opening, I actually want to open with a snippet from this presentation to kind of help us level set.
I want to ask you a question, and that is, what is in your life's blueprint? This is the most important and crucial period of your lives, for what you do now and what you decide now at this age may well determine which way your life shall go.
Every time I go back to it, I hear something else, and I believe that this message is universal. It's for everybody, and obviously there was a stronger emphasis around African American when he was making this presentation. But I believe that this message is for everybody, and so what I've done is I've taken certain pieces out of this speech, and I've contextualized it to almost to where we are now as a culture, as a society. So the three principles that I took out of it is, the first one is the notion of having in your personal blueprint to be sure that you have a principle of somebodyness, that you have to have the basic principle and the determination to achieve excellence in your various field of your endeavor, that you believe in yourself, that you believe that you can achieve. So that self-awareness and that the self-affirmation. And there's a part in the speech where he talks about when you decide what you are going to be in life, set it out to be as if the God Almighty has appointed you to do that thing. And don't just be a good person, but be a good as everyone else. And in his context, he was saying, don't just be a good African American person. Be good as everybody else in what you choose to do, right? So in this context, with everybody being inclusive, I'm telling you, be the best that you can be, not just in terms of what you can do or the small box that you might be in or the limitation that you might be in. Be the best as you can be. And then the third principle that I took out of this presentation was the internal principle of beauty. And this is part of the last piece that he says. He says, finally, in your last blueprint, you must be committed to the internal principle of beauty, love, and justice. Don't allow anybody to pull you so low to make you hate them and cause you to lose your self-respect. That you don't struggle for justice. And as I was reading about the challenges that he was facing and the perseverance and the courage and the motivation that he had, I started to think this man he had a conviction in his heart around bringing his positive intention to life. And he went about acting upon it. And because he activated that calling, that's what allowed him to be able to pave the way for so many people. And we've benefited from that in result of his cry. But I wanted to go back to that positive intention coming to life. And that's kind of the framework of my presentation today. So when you think about positive intention coming to life, this is how I think about it. Your being and the doing. So the being is your mindset. The doing is what you do. And the doing is happening externally. You can measure it. The being is what's happening internally. And those two things are super, super important. But in order to bring your positive intention to life, to make an impact, your being is what's happening inside you. It's the feelings and who you are and how you're made and the different influences within your upbringing, your family. That's your being. That's the nature or essence of a person. And then the intention has to equal by what's influencing us. And the being influences our doing. But the problem is sometimes our positive intention don't really manifest externally, but we hold on to it as if it is. So today, as I'm presenting to you, I want to challenge you, because what Martin Luther King did, he was able to take ownership on those positive intentions that he had, and he acted upon it in order for those things to manifest externally. And years later, we still talk about those things that he did. But the genesis of where it came from his internal being. It came from what he believed in, came from the convictions that he had within his heart. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what influenced my being and who I am. The picture that you see, I grew up in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I grew up in a middle-class family, never had to really worry about anything. That's a picture of my father on the right side, my mom in the middle. That's me on the left side. Yes, these pictures are in the Congo, because I know some people, when they think of Africa, they think about people running around naked on top of elephants. That was not my experience. I grew up in a middle-class family. But a civil war broke out in 1997, which led to my father's assassination. And after my father was assassinated, my mother really worked really hard to get us out of the refugee camp, out of the Congo, and we ended up at a refugee camp in Benin, which is in Western Africa. And then 2 years later, my family and I found ourselves in the coldest place on earth, Manchester, New Hampshire, in February, with no friends, didn't know how to speak the language except the hope of a better life. And the experiences that I had early on, it helped my family believe that we can move forward, and we can benefit from the support and the resources that this country provided. And those experiences influenced my being. A lot of my interaction early on in New Hampshire was predominantly with white community. I mean, I had friends that were from different backgrounds and different culture, but where I emerged myself because of the church community I was involved with, in middle school, I ended up going to a private school. A lot of the times, I was the only person of color, the only black person, then along a person that came from Africa. So I had to kind of navigate this really narrow road around who I was, what my identity was, what my self-worth was. But I was a little bit different because I just escaped a civil war. My family just got a second chance of life. So early on, certain things that might have happened to me that were probably very discriminatory and prejudiced, it didn't really impact me because in my head, I was in survival mode. But the more I started to acclimate to America, the more I started to realize, hey, you don't need to be in survival mode anymore. You got to be present of what's happening. And then I started to see some of those injustice, some of those discrimination. And I have to tell you, when you see this picture, I was in middle school in this picture, and a lot of my friends, I was the first person of color that they invited over their house or went over for lunch or was given a ride home. And certain questions would come up, and I would have to educate the parents and my friends about what my experiences were. I ended up graduating from middle school, and then I ended up graduating from high school. But one of the things that happened to me in seventh grade, the summer of my seventh grade year, I ended up joining an organization that traveled to inner city America to do community outreach. So mind you, I've been living in New Hampshire for 3.5 years. And somebody from my local church said, hey, we do this summer program where we go to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and then you travel in different places and you do outreach. And I was like, I begged my mom to let me go. And she said, yeah, you can go. And then that was the first time that I was introduced to different community, diverse community throughout the country. And I was involved with that program from the age of 12 years old until I graduated from college. Even a couple of years back, I was still involved with it. So for many, many years. And one of the things that happened to me, I started to realize what the experience of people of color was in America beyond my experience in Manchester, New Hampshire. I toured different communities, after school program, English learning centers. And all I would do is I would just listen to people's stories, and I would tell my story and how I overcame, the challenges that I overcame. And that brought hope and life to people. But those experiences informed my being. And it became that it wasn't just about what happened to me. It started to inform how I saw the world around me and what I advocated for. And I would come back to New Hampshire every summer and I would tell my friends and my family members what's going on. And I was so passionate and driven by what I was learning from these communities. So when we talk about the being, we have to be also able to reflect on personally to try to figure out, okay, what informs who we are and what influences what we prioritize on. We live in this ecosystem, right? We live in this ecosystem in America, and there's certain freedoms that are proclaimed that everybody benefits to. But the reality is not all those freedoms trickles down to everybody. And that started to influence what I prioritized on. And that influenced what my doing became. I positioned myself in places where I felt that I can learn, but I can also contribute. When I joined SNHU to work for College for America, I was working for the State Department. So I was working for College for America part-time. And about 6 months in, I realized that the work that we were doing was more impactful than the work that I was doing at the State Department. So I ended up leaving the State Department in order to join SNHU College for America. And that's a little bit more pictures. So what you see, that's a picture when I visited Kaziba refugee camp. And it was almost full circle because I said, I lived in a refugee camp for 2 years in my family's transition. And the craziest thing was for me to only live in a refugee camp for 2 years and move to America. My family was an anomaly. Most people spend 17 to 27 years living in a refugee camp. So when I went to Kaziba to visit it, it was surreal to me that my family was able to get out of this situation. And as I was talking to the people that lived there, they were telling, we've been here for 15 years. We've been here for 20 years. I couldn't even imagine living in a refugee camp for that long. But that was the reality of the folks that were here. I started to think about part of my doing. What do I need to do to, one, develop the skill set that I need in order to make the impact that I want to make, but also more importantly, take ownership of who I am. In that first principle that I mentioned earlier about self-worth, right? There's so many different aspects about self-worth. There's how you see yourself. There's what you think you can contribute. But for me, it's also about that self-development. I was always hungry to continue to learn in order to build the skills that I needed to meet my ambition. So today, I want to encourage you, wherever you are, what are certain things that makes you, but you haven't been able to really foster or put the space to channel and make it you? So I want to encourage you because part of accepting who you are is also about celebrating who you are, but also identifying where you want to go. And if you identify where you want to go, it's also important to identify what kind of skill set do you need to have in order to get to where you want to be and where you want to go. But one of the things in terms of my model, in my approach, it always comes back to engagement and relationship building. And relationship building that are authentic, where I allow myself to put down the walls in order to meet people where they are, in order to learn from them. And as I learn from them, then it informs how I show up. And more importantly, how I consider them when I might not agree with their point of view or their perspectives. And then I also believe that our responsibility is to activate our ability to stand for justice, to confront injustice. That third principle that I mentioned, it says, finally, in your last blueprint, you must be committed to the internal principle of beauty, love, and justice. Don't allow anybody to pull you so low to make you hate them and cause you to lose yourself, your self-respect, that you don't struggle for justice. And when you look at the American history, when we confront the negative perspectives, point of views, and landscape of our society, it becomes confrontational. And it's a lot easier for us to close our mouth and to keep it moving, especially if the impact is not really impacting you directly. But that was not what Martin Luther King's experience was. He had to persevere. He had to put his foot down. Even though today we celebrate the modality in which he took, he was still viewed as an antagonist during that time. So I'm asking you, what are some of the injustice that you see, that you read about? But how are you activating your being? The positive intentions that you have and how you want to show up. How are you activating it? I encourage you guys, as there's so many different moving parts in our society, there's so much moving parts within our family dynamic, there's so many moving parts just as a whole. As you figure out what shapes your blueprint, it's very important to understand and reflect on what is that blueprint and how would it contribute to the positive intentions that you have and how do they manifest and how they show up.